The wind didn't howl in the Wyoming territory, it screamed. And for Jenny Vance, a widow living 10 miles from the nearest neighbor, that scream usually meant one thing: death was knocking. But on the night of the great blizzard of 1881, death didn't knock. It kicked the door in. She thought she was alone with her grief and a loaded shotgun. She was wrong. The man bleeding out on her floor wasn't just a stranger. He was the most feared gunman in the West, and he didn't come for shelter. He came for a secret her dead husband had taken to the grave. The winter of 1881 in the Black Hills wasn't just a season, it was a sentence. The snow had been falling for 3 days straight, piling up against the hewn logs of the cabin like a white shroud. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burning pine and stale coffee. Jenny Vance sat at the rough-hewn table, her fingers tracing the rim of a tin cup. At 32, the frontier had already etched fine lines around her eyes, but it hadn't dulled the steel in them. It had been 6 months since they buried Elias. 6 months since the mining accident at Coal Creek that left her with nothing but a drafty cabin, a mule that bit, and a silence so loud it sometimes made her ears ring. She stood up, wrapping her wool shawl tighter, and walked to the window. Ice had frosted the glass, but through a small clear patch, she could see the storm raging. It was a whiteout. A man could die 10 feet from his front door in weather like this. Thump. Jenny froze. Her hand instinctively went to the heavy Colt Navy revolver resting on the mantel. She held her breath, listening. The wind battered the roof, groaning against the timbers. Thump. Scratch. It wasn't the wind, it was heavy, deliberate. Something dragged against the wood of the porch. A bear? A wolf desperate for warmth? Jenny didn't hesitate. She picked up the revolver, cocking the hammer. The metallic click was sharp in the small room. She aimed the barrel at the heavy oak door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady. She wouldn't die trembling. No answer. Just a heavy, wet cough that sounded like wet gravel grinding together. Then, the latch lifted. The door didn't open. It exploded inward, pushed by a violent gust of wind and the weight of a body crashing against it. Snow swirled into the room, instantly dropping the temperature. Jenny took a step back, finger tightening on the trigger. A figure lay face down on the floorboards. He was massive, wrapped in a buffalo hide coat that was dark and stiff with ice and blood. A trail of crimson smeared the snow behind him, stark and horrifying against the white. He groaned, trying to push himself up, but his arms gave out. He collapsed, his face turning to the side. Jenny lowered the gun slightly. He was unconscious. She rushed forward, kicking the door shut against the howling gale and dropping the heavy iron bar into place. She knelt beside the stranger, turning him over. He was a mess of a man. Dark hair matted with sweat and blood plastered to a pale forehead. A thick, dark beard hid his jaw, but it couldn't hide the scar that ran from his left eyebrow down to his cheekbone. He looked like a war map of bad decisions. She pulled his coat open. Beneath it, a grey wool shirt was soaked through on the right side. Gunshot. Fresh. Jenny sat back on her heels, her mind racing. A man shot in a blizzard didn't just wander here. He was either running from something terrible, or he was the terrible thing someone else was running from. She saw the gun belt then. 2 pearl-handled Schofield revolvers, tied down low on his hips. This wasn't a drifter or a lost miner. This was a man who killed for a living. She should drag him back out. That was the smart thing to do. If the law was after him, aiding him was a crime. If a gang was after him, they'd burn her house down to get him. The man's eyes fluttered open. They were a shocking, icy blue. clear despite the pain. He looked at the ceiling, then his gaze snapped to Jenny. His hand twitched toward his hip. "Don't," Jenny said, raising her Colt again. "You're bleeding on my rug, stranger. Give me one reason not to finish what the winter started." The man coughed, blood bubbling at the corner of his lips. He tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. "Because," he wheezed, his voice like sandpaper, "because I know where Elias hid the gold." Jenny's heart stopped. The gun wavered in her hand. Elias was a poor miner. He died owing money to half the town. He didn't have gold. "You're delirious," she whispered. "No," the man rasped, his eyes sliding shut again as consciousness failed him. "I'm Silas. Silas Thorne." Jenny gasped. The name hit her harder than the cold. Silas Thorne. The ghost of the territories. The bounty on his head was higher than the value of her entire homestead. And he just claimed her dead husband was a thief. Jenny didn't sleep. How could she? The devil was unconscious on her cot. She had stripped him of his weapons, the 2 Schofields, a hidden derringer in his boot, and a terrifyingly sharp Bowie knife she found sheathed at the small of his back. She placed them all on the far side of the room, covered by a cloth, and kept her own Colt tucked into her apron string. Getting the coat off him had been a struggle. He was heavy, dense with muscle. Underneath, his body was a tapestry of scars, bullet holes, knife slashes, burns. He was a man who had survived everything the world threw at him, until now. The wound was in his side, just above the hip. The bullet was still in there. She boiled water and tore up one of Elias's old shirts. She wasn't a doctor, but on the frontier, you learned to stitch livestock and people alike. Flesh was flesh. When she poured the whiskey over the wound, Silas Thorne screamed. It was a guttural, raw sound that made the hair on her arms stand up. His back arched off the mattress, muscles straining. "Easy," she commanded, pressing a hot towel against the wound. "Hold still or you'll bleed out." He slumped back, panting, sweat beading on his face. His eyes found hers, lucid now. Pain had sharpened him. "You have a heavy hand, woman," he grunted. "I'm not a nurse," Jenny shot back, threading a needle through the flame of a kerosene lamp. "And you're an intruder. Be grateful I'm using thread and not baling wire." She began to stitch. He bit down on a piece of leather she'd shoved into his mouth, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edges of the cot. He didn't scream again. He watched her. His gaze was unsettling, analyzing her movements, the layout of the cabin, the exits. Even half dead, he was hunting for an advantage. "Done," she said finally, tying off the knot. She bandaged him tightly. "The bullet is deep. I can't get it out without killing you. If the infection doesn't get you, the fever might." She stepped back, wiping her bloody hands on a rag. "Now, you talk. You said Elias's name." Silas spat the leather out. He took a shallow breath. "Water." She brought him a ladle from the bucket. He drank greedily, water spilling into his beard. "Elias Vance," Silas said, his voice stronger now, "worked the Copperhead mine. Died in a cave-in 6 months back, or so the story goes." "It's not a story," Jenny said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "I buried an empty coffin because the rock crushed him to dust." "What do you know about it?" Silas tried to sit up, but winced and collapsed back. "Elias didn't die in a cave-in, Mrs. Vance. He was shot in the back." Jenny felt the room spin. "You're lying." "I don't lie about killing," Silas said calmly. "And I didn't kill him. But I know who did. And I know why." "Why?" "Because 3 days before he died, Elias Vance robbed the Union Pacific payroll train outside of Cheyenne. $80,000 in bearer bonds and gold certificates." Jenny laughed. It was a brittle, hysterical sound. Elias? My Elias? He couldn't steal a chicken without praying for forgiveness. He was a God-fearing man. He was a desperate man, Silas corrected. Desperate men do strange things. He had a partner, a man named Coltrane. Jenny froze. Sheriff Coltrane? The very same, Silas nodded. Sheriff Barnaby read Coltrane. They took the train, but Elias got a conscience, or maybe just greedy. He took the loot and hid it. Coltrane killed him for it, but he never found the money. He thinks you have it. Jenny backed away until she hit the table. That's insane. If Coltrane thought I had it, he would have come for me. He's been watching you, Silas said, waiting to see if you spend it, waiting to see if you dig it up. But he's tired of waiting. That's why I'm here. To protect me? She scoffed. You're a hired gun, Thorne. You don't protect people. I'm here because Coltrane double-crossed me on a job in Santa Fe, Silas growled. I want him dead, and I want my cut of that money. Elias sent me a letter before he died. He said if anything happened to him, I was to find his wife. He said the key is in the Bible. Jenny looked at the worn family Bible resting on the mantel-shelf. The leather was cracked. The gold lettering faded. I've read that book 1,000 times, Jenny said. There's nothing in there but verses. Then look again, Silas said. Because Coltrane is coming. I shot one of his deputies on the ridge before the storm hit. They tracked me here. Once this blizzard breaks, you'll have a posse of 6 men at your door, and they aren't coming to pay respects. The storm raged for another 24 hours. For Jenny, it was a time of agonizing suspension. She was trapped in a box with a wolf, waiting for a pack of hyenas to arrive. She didn't look at the Bible immediately. She spent the time fortifying the cabin. She boarded up the windows, leaving only narrow firing slits. She checked her ammunition. She sharpened her skinning knife. Silas watched her from the cot. He was healing with unnatural speed. By the second morning, he was sitting up, cleaning his Schofields with a rag Jenny had provided. You handle that shotgun well, Silas observed as she checked the breech. My father raised 4 daughters, Jenny said curtly. He wanted sons. He taught us to shoot so he wouldn't feel like he wasted his time. Elias was a fool to keep secrets from a woman like you. Jenny stopped. She looked at the Bible on the mantel. She walked over and pulled it down. It was heavy in her hands. If there is nothing in here, she said, I'm throwing you out into the snow. Fair enough. She sat at the table and opened the book. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. She flipped through the pages. Nothing. No map. No letter. Just the thin, crinkled pages of scripture. Check the spine, Silas suggested. Jenny turned the book over. She ran her fingers along the inside of the leather binding. There was a lump. A small, almost imperceptible ridge near the bottom. She grabbed a small paring knife and carefully sliced the inner lining. Silas leaned forward, his eyes intense. She pulled out a piece of paper. It wasn't a map. It was a deed to a plot of land in the cemetery at Dead Man's Creek. Plot 44. He bought a grave? Jenny whispered. Why? Elias Vance isn't buried in the cemetery, Silas said. You said he was lost in the cave-in. No body. We put a marker up on the hill behind the house, Jenny nodded. So who is in plot 44? Nothing. Silas grinned, a predatory expression returning to his face. Or $80,000. We have to go, Silas said, standing up. He swayed slightly but caught himself. The storm is breaking. Jenny looked out the peephole. The wind had died down. The sun was trying to pierce the grey clouds. The silence of the frontier had returned, but now it felt menacing. We can't move the gold, Jenny said, Not in this snow. We don't need to move it. We just need to get there before Coltrane does. And if he's already there, then we kill him." Jenny looked at the deed in her hand. $80,000. It was enough to go to San Francisco, Paris even. Enough to never be cold again. Enough to never fear the winter. But then she looked at Silas. "You said you wanted your cut. How much?" "Half," Silas said. "And if I say no?" Silas holstered his gun. "Then Coltrane kills you, takes it all, and pisses on Elias's memory. I'm the only friend you have, Widow Vance." Suddenly, a crack echoed through the valley. Ping. Wood splintered from the window frame, inches from Jenny's face. She dropped to the floor, scrambling for her shotgun. "Get down!" Silas roared, flipping the heavy oak table onto its side to create a barricade. Another shot. Then a volley. Bullets hammered the log walls, punching through the chinking, sending dust and splinters flying. "They're here!" Jenny yelled over the noise. Silas crawled to the crack in the window boards. He peered out. "6 of them," he called out. "Spread out in the tree line. Coltrane is in the middle. He's got a Winchester repeating rifle." "What do we do?" Jenny asked, her hands shaking as she loaded shells. Silas looked at her. His blue eyes were burning with a terrifying light. "We don't wait for them to burn us out," he said. "We give them a war." The first bullet had shattered the silence. The second shattered the whiskey bottle on the shelf, showering Jenny in glass and amber liquid. The smell of alcohol mixed instantly with the acrid bite of gunpowder. "Stay low," Silas commanded. He didn't look like a wounded man anymore. Adrenaline had turned him into a machine. He rolled toward the window, the Schofield in his hand, barking twice. Outside, a scream cut through the wind. "One down," Silas grunted. 5 to go. Jenny clutched her husband's double-barreled shotgun. Her hands were sweating despite the freezing cold. She had hunted deer, yes. She had put down a lame horse, but she had never fired at a man. "They're flanking," Silas yelled. "Watch the back door." Jenny scrambled across the floorboards, splinters digging into her palms. She reached the rear of the cabin just as the heavy wood of the back door splintered inward. A boot had kicked the latch. Through the gap she saw a face, a deputy with a red scarf and bad teeth, raising a pistol. Jenny didn't think. She didn't breathe. She pulled the trigger. The shotgun roared, kicking hard against her shoulder. The door disintegrated, and the man behind it was thrown backward into the snow as if yanked by an invisible rope. Jenny stared, her ears ringing, stunned by the violence of it. "Don't look at it!" Silas's voice was sharp, cutting through her shock. "Reload! If you stop to think, we're both dead!" Bullets continued to chew up the front of the cabin. Coltrane was suppressing them, keeping their heads down while his men moved in. "They're going to burn us out," Silas said, reloading his revolvers with practiced fluid movements. "Coltrane doesn't care about the house. He knows the money isn't here." "The root cellar?" Jenny gasped. "There's a trap door under the rug. It leads to the storm tunnel that opens out by the creek bed." Silas looked at her, a grin breaking through his beard. "Mrs. Vance, you are full of surprises." "Go," she said. "I'll cover." "No, you go first." "I'm not arguing with you," Jenny snapped. She grabbed the box of shells and the deed to the grave plot. She kicked the rug aside and hauled up the heavy trap door. The smell of damp earth and rotting potatoes wafted up. "Fire the lantern," Silas ordered. Jenny grabbed the kerosene lamp from the table. "Throw it at the door," he said. Jenny hesitated for a fraction of a second. This was her home. Every log, every nail Elias had put there. But Elias was gone, and the house was a coffin. She hurled the lamp. It shattered against the front door, and flames roared up the dry timber instantly. A wall of fire separated them from Coltrane's view. "Move!" They dropped into the darkness of the cellar. Jenny led the way, crawling through the narrow dirt tunnel. Above them, she could hear the heavy boots of men storming the burning cabin, shouting confusion as they found the room empty. They emerged into the blinding white of the creek bed, 50 yards behind the cabin. The snow was waist-deep here. The cabin was fully engulfed now, a pyre of orange flame against the grey sky. "My mule is in the barn," Jenny whispered. "Forget the mule," Silas said, clutching his side. Fresh blood was seeping through his bandage. "They'll see us. We have to take their horses. They left them tied at the tree line." They moved like ghosts through the blizzard's tail end. Jenny felt a strange detachment. The woman who had sat crying at her table 2 days ago was gone. In her place was something colder, harder. They reached the horses. Silas cut the reins of 2 strong roans. He struggled to mount, his face going grey with pain, but he hauled himself up. "Where is Dead Man's Creek?" he asked. 10 miles east," Jenny said, swinging into the saddle of the second horse. "Through the Devil's Gap." "Then ride," Silas said. "Because when Coltrane realizes we aren't burning in that cabin, he's going to ride like the hounds of hell are snapping at his heels." The escape from the burning cabin was not a flight. It was a descent into a frozen purgatory. The blizzard had passed, but it had left behind a world scoured clean of warmth. The landscape was a monochromatic nightmare of white snow and black rock, illuminated only by the faint, sickly light of a moon struggling through the cloud cover. Jenny Vance rode the stolen deputy's roan, her knuckles white where she gripped the frozen leather reins. Behind her, the orange glow of her home, her entire life, faded into a pinprick and then vanished, swallowed by the undulating hills of the Wyoming Territory. She felt a strange hollowness in her chest. She should be crying. She should be mourning the loss of the quilt her grandmother stitched, the table Elias had built, the very walls that had sheltered them. But the cold had numbed her, body and soul. Survival left no room for sentiment. Beside her, Silas Thorne was a dark shape, hunched over his saddle. He rode with the innate grace of a man born on horseback, but Jenny could see the tremors racking his frame. The wound in his side, reopened during the shootout, was a silent clock ticking down his remaining time. They rode for 2 hours without speaking, the only sound the crunch of hooves breaking the crust of the snow and the labored breathing of the horses. They were heading east, toward the jagged teeth of the mountains where Dead Man's Creek lay buried. "We need to stop," Jenny called out, her voice snatched away by the wind. "The horses are blowing. They'll die if we push them up the incline." Silas didn't argue. He simply nodded, pointing a gloved hand toward a limestone overhang that jutted out from the cliff face like a bruised lip. Locals called it the Pass of Whispers, claiming the wind caught in the fissures of the rock sounded like the voices of the lost. Tonight, the whispers were screaming. They guided the horses under the shelter of the rock. The relief from the biting wind was instant, though the air remained frigid. Silas slid from his saddle, his boots hitting the stone with a heavy thud. He stumbled, catching himself against the flank of his horse. Jenny was there in a second. She gripped his arm, feeling the heat of his fever radiating through the thick buffalo hide of his coat. "I've got you," she said, guiding him to sit against the cold stone wall. "I'm fine," Silas grunted, the lie so weak it was almost an insult. He fumbled inside his coat and produced a silver flask he'd lifted from the deputy's saddlebags. He took a long, shuddering pull. "Whiskey, the only medicine that doesn't lie to you." He offered the flask to her. Jenny hesitated, then took it. The liquor burned her throat like liquid fire, settling in her stomach with a comforting weight. She handed it back, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Let me look at the side," she said. "Leave it," Silas murmured, leaning his head back against the rock, his eyes closing. "You stitched it once. Opening it up again won't change the ending." Jenny sat beside him, pulling her knees to her chest for warmth. In the gloom, the legendary gunman looked less like a monster and more like a ruin, something once grand that had been battered by too many storms. "Why are you doing this, Silas?" she asked quietly. The question had been gnawing at her since he dragged her through the trap door. "You could have ridden off alone. You could have left me for Coltrane. You said you wanted the money, but a dead man can't spend gold." Silas opened one eye. It shone with a terrifying, icy clarity. "I told you. Coltrane owes me." "That's not enough," Jenny countered. "Men kill for money. They kill for revenge. But they don't die for strangers. You're bleeding out in the snow for a woman you met 2 days ago." Silas chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that ended in a cough. He took another drink from the flask. "I had a brother," he said softly. The wind outside seemed to drop, listening. "Toby. He was 20. Stupid. Wanted to be like me. I told him the outlaw life was a disease, not a career, but he wouldn't listen. He signed on with Coltrane for a railway job, off the books. Coltrane needed an extra gun." Silas paused, his grip tightening on the flask until his knuckles turned white. After the job, Coltrane didn't want to pay a full share, so he put a bullet in the back of Toby's head and left him in a ditch near Laramie. I found him 3 days later. Jenny stared at him, seeing the ghost that haunted the gunman. "So this is justice." "There's no such thing as justice out here, Jenny," Silas said, his voice hard. "Just the strong eating the weak. Coltrane is strong. I intend to be the thing that chokes him." He turned his head to look at her. "And what about you, Widow Vance? You think digging up that box is going to fix everything? You think $80,000 washes away the blood?" "It was Elias's," she said defensively, though the conviction in her voice was thinning. "He died for it. If I leave it there, he died for nothing." "Elias," Silas mused, saying the name like a curse word. "You talk about him like a saint. But saints don't rob trains, and they don't hide fortunes in graveyards while their wives starve in cabins." "He was protecting me," Jenny snapped. "He knew if I had the money, Coltrane would come for me." "Maybe," Silas said. "Or maybe he just loved the gold more than he trusted you. Men do dark things when they see that much shine, Jenny. It changes them. It eats out the good parts and leaves only the hunger. Don't be surprised if the man you find in that box isn't the man you married." Jenny wanted to slap him. She wanted to scream that Elias was good, that he was gentle, that he sang hymns while he chopped wood. But the doubt was a cold worm in her gut. Elias had secrets. He had a partner. He had a grave plot he never mentioned. "We should move," Jenny said abruptly, standing up to break the tension. "The wind is shifting." Silas groaned as he hauled himself up. He swayed, and Jenny instinctively reached out to steady him. For a moment they stood close, the steam of their breath mingling in the cold air. A strange intimacy passed between them, the bond of two people who knew they were likely marching toward their own graves. "You're a hard woman, Jenny Vance," Silas said, and this time it sounded like a compliment. "I had to be," she replied. They remounted the horses. As they emerged from the Pass of Whispers, the view opened up to the valley below. Jenny looked back the way they had come. Far in the distance, against the white canvas of the snow, she saw movement. 5 dark specks, moving with purpose. "They're coming," she whispered. Silas didn't even look back. He checked the cylinder of his Schofield, spinning it with a metallic click. "Let them come," he said. "I want Coltrane to see my face when the lights go out." He spurred his horse forward. To the graveyard, Mrs. Vance. It's time to wake the dead. Dead Man's Creek was a scar on the landscape, a cluster of rotting timber and broken windows that stared out into the darkness like empty eye sockets. The wind whistled through the gaps in the saloon walls, playing a mournful tune for a town that had died a decade ago. Jenny and Silas left their exhausted horses behind the livery stable and made the climb to the cemetery on foot. The graveyard sat on a wind-swept hill, surrounded by a rusted iron fence that looked like twisted vines. Silas was fading. His breathing was wet and ragged, and he leaned heavily on Jenny's shoulder. Every step left a drop of blood on the pristine snow. Plot 44, Jenny whispered, the cold air burning her throat. By the weeping willow. They found it at the edge of the grounds. The tree was dead, split by lightning, looming over a mound of earth marked only by a blank wooden cross. "This is it," Silas wheezed, dropping to his knees. He pulled a spade from his belt, but his hand shook so violently he dropped it. "Sit," Jenny commanded, grabbing the shovel. "I'll do it." She dug with a fury born of desperation. The ground was frozen hard at the surface, but beneath the frost, the soil was loose. She shoveled until her hands blistered, until her back screamed, driven by the knowledge that Sheriff Coltrane was somewhere behind them in the dark. Thud. The shovel struck wood. Jenny swept away the remaining dirt, revealing a heavy pine crate stamped with the Union Pacific logo. Silas crawled forward, jamming a crowbar under the lid. With a groan of nails, it popped open. Jenny gasped. Even in the dim moonlight, the contents shimmered. Neatly stacked bundles of banknotes and canvas sacks, heavy with gold coins. $80,000. It was more money than she had ever seen. Enough to buy a kingdom, or at least a life without fear. "He did it," Silas rasped, staring at the fortune. "The son of a bitch really did it." "We have to go," Jenny said, reaching for a bundle of bonds. "We can load the saddlebags and—" "A bit late for that, Mrs. Vance." The voice drifted from the darkness, smooth and cold. Jenny spun around. Sheriff Coltrane sat on his horse just outside the cemetery gate, the tip of his cigar glowing red. Behind him, 3 deputies emerged from the shadows, guns drawn. "I have to thank you," Coltrane drawled, resting his Winchester rifle on his saddle horn. "I've been looking for that box for 6 months. You two saved me a lot of digging." "Coltrane," Silas growled, struggling to stand. He placed himself between Jenny and the guns. "Drop it, Silas," Coltrane warned. "You're half dead already. Don't make me hurry the process." The deputies cocked their revolvers. The sound was deafening in the silence. "Kill the gunman," Coltrane ordered casually. "Keep the girl. She might know." "Wait!" The scream tore through the night, coming from behind the weeping willow. A figure stumbled into the clearing. He was a skeleton of a man, wrapped in rags, his hair matted and wild. He held a rusted pistol in a shaking hand, looking like a ghoul risen from the earth. Jenny felt the blood drain from her face. Elias? It was her husband, the man she had mourned, the man she had starved for. "Don't shoot!" Elias shrieked, looking frantically between Coltrane and Silas. "Red! Red! It's me! We can make a deal!" "Elias?" Coltrane laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "Well, look at what the snow dragged in. I thought you crawled off to die." "I was hiding," Elias babbled, his eyes darting to the money box. "I watched the house. I knew you were watching, Red. I couldn't move the gold alone." Jenny took a step toward him, her heart shattering. "You watched? You were alive this whole time. I nearly froze to death, Elias." Elias turned on her, his face twisting into a snarl. He raised his pistol, not at Coltrane but at her. "Stay back," Elias yelled. "You were just a decoy, Jenny. I needed someone to keep Red busy. I didn't think you'd be stupid enough to bring a gunman here." The betrayal hit her harder than a physical blow. He hadn't just left her. He had used her as bait. "We split it," Elias shouted to Coltrane, desperate and pathetic. 50-50, Red, just like we planned. We kill these two, and we walk away rich." Coltrane looked at Elias, then at the gold, and smiled. "I admire the hustle, Elias. Selling out your own wife? That's cold, even for me." "She means nothing," Elias cried, backing toward the open grave to guard the money. "Just kill them!" Coltrane racked the lever of his rifle. "Well, you heard the man. Boys, cut them down." Silas Thorne took a deep breath. He looked at Jenny, his blue eyes calm amidst the madness. "When I move," he whispered, "get down." The ghost of the territories reached for his guns. The wind in the graveyard seemed to stop, holding its breath as the revelation settled over the frozen earth. The silence was heavier than the snow, broken only by the dry, frantic rustle of the willow branches above them. Jenny stared at the man standing across the open grave. The face was familiar. The same sharp nose, the same brown eyes she had looked into on her wedding day. But the soul behind them was a stranger's. Elias Vance, the man she had wept for, the man she had built a shrine to in her memory, stood with a rusted revolver leveled at her chest. "You watched," Jenny whispered, the words scraping out of her throat like jagged glass. "You were alive this whole time, when the blizzard started, when the food ran out." "You were watching?" Elias offered a jagged, shivering shrug. He looked like a ghoul, his skin pulled tight over his cheekbones, his lips cracked and bleeding. But his eyes were bright with a feverish greed as they flickered between the woman and the box of money. "I was in the cave up on High Point Ridge," Elias rasped. "I had a spyglass. I saw the smoke from the chimney. I knew you were alive." "I thought I was starving," she said, her voice rising, trembling with a fury she hadn't known she possessed. "I thought I was alone. I prayed to God to keep your soul safe, Elias. Every night." "And God answered," Elias sneered, gesturing with the gun. "He kept me safe until the snow cleared enough to dig." "I couldn't move the box alone, Jenny. Not with Coltrane patrolling the roads. I needed a distraction. I needed the sheriff to look at you so he wouldn't look at me." "I wasn't a distraction," she spat. "I was your wife." "You were a liability," Elias shouted, his calm facade cracking. "Do you know what $80,000 buys? It buys a new life, a new name, a new wife if I want one. One that doesn't smell like horse manure and lye soap. I did what I had to do to survive. That's the law of the frontier, isn't it?" He turned his gaze to Sheriff Coltrane, who sat high on his horse, watching the domestic dispute with amused contempt. "Red," Elias called out, his voice taking on a wheedling, desperate tone. "You know how it is. We can cut a deal. You kill the gunman, I kill the girl. We split the pot, 40-40, and give your boys 20 to keep their mouths shut. No judges, no trials, just rich men." Coltrane chuckled, a low rumble that sounded like rocks tumbling in a canyon. He rested the stock of his Winchester rifle against his shoulder, aiming it lazily at Silas. "You know, Elias," Coltrane drawled, "I almost admire you. I've shot men for boots. I've shot men for looking at me sideways. But I never met a man who'd sell his own woman to the wolves just to save his back from a shovel." Coltrane's eyes narrowed. "But I don't split pots with rats, and I don't leave witnesses." The air crackled. The tension was a pulled trigger, waiting for the hammer to fall. Silas, who had been leaning casually against a tombstone, suddenly spoke. His voice was low, devoid of fear, carrying easily across the small distance. "You talk too much, Elias," Silas said. "And you, Sheriff, you're sitting on that horse like a target at a county fair." You got a death wish, gunman? Coltrane snarled, tightening his grip on the rifle. No, Silas said, his eyes locking onto Jenny's for a fleeting second, a look of intense instruction. Get down. I just have a job to finish. Silas didn't go for his gun. That would have been too slow against a leveled rifle. Instead, he kicked the back of the shovel blade that was sticking out of the snow pile. The handle flew up, catching the moonlight, spinning in a blur of wood and iron. It struck the nearest deputy in the face with a sickening crunch. The man screamed, his horse rearing violently, throwing the formation into chaos. Now! Silas roared. He dove to his right, rolling behind the thick marble slab of a family crypt. Just as Coltrane's Winchester thundered, the bullet chipped the stone inches from Silas's head, sending fragments flying like shrapnel. Jenny dropped. She didn't think. Instinct took over. She threw herself flat against the frozen ground, the cold biting through her dress instantly. The graveyard erupted. It wasn't the rhythmic popping of a target practice. It was a chaotic storm of noise. The crack of the rifles, the boom of the heavy revolvers, the screaming of terrified horses, and the shouting of men. "Kill them! Kill them all!" Coltrane bellowed, working the lever of his rifle. Jenny crawled. She dug her fingers into the snow and dirt, dragging herself towards the cover of the weeping willow trunk. Bullets kicked up geysers of dirt around her. She saw Elias. He hadn't taken cover. He had jumped into the grave. He was cowering in the hole, hugging the crate of money, shielding it with his body as if the paper bills could stop lead. "Covering fire!" Silas yelled from behind the crypt. He popped up, his pearl-handled Schofields flashing in the gloom. Bang, bang, click, bang. Silas was a surgeon with those guns. One deputy fell, tumbling from his saddle with a hole in his chest. Another horse took a round in the flank and bolted, carrying its rider into the dark tree line. But Coltrane held his ground. The sheriff was a veteran of the Indian Wars, and he didn't panic. He spurred his horse, forcing it to trot sideways, keeping him a moving target while he laid down a suppressing fire on Silas's position. "I'm going to pin you down and gut you, Thorne," Coltrane shouted. Jenny reached the willow tree. She pressed her back against the rough bark, her breath coming in shallow, icy gasps. She clutched the Colt Navy revolver in her apron pocket. Her hands were shaking so hard she didn't know if she could hold it, let alone fire it. She looked across the clearing. Silas was pinned. Coltrane's remaining deputies were flanking him, moving through the tombstones. Silas couldn't move without being cut down. He was reloading, his movements slightly slower now. The wound in his side had reopened. She could see the dark stain spreading on his coat. He was dying for her. A stranger, a killer, a man she had almost shot 2 nights ago, was currently bleeding out in the snow to save her life, while her husband hid in a hole with stolen money. The realization hit Jenny like a physical blow. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. She stepped out from behind the willow tree. "Elias!" she screamed. The shout cut through the gunfire. It was so raw, so filled with command, that for a second everyone paused. Elias peeked his head over the rim of the grave. He saw her standing there, exposed, the Colt in her hand, hanging by her side. "Jenny, get down, you stupid cow!" Elias hissed. "Shoot the sheriff! Shoot him!" "No," Jenny said, raising the heavy pistol. She didn't aim at Coltrane. She aimed at the grave. Elias's eyes widened. He scrambled, trying to push himself deeper into the pit, but he was trapped by the box he loved so much. "Jenny, wait. Baby, listen to me," Elias pleaded, holding up his hands. "I did it for us. We can go to Mexico. We can be kings." "I don't want to be a king," Jenny said, her voice steady, the iron sight of the pistol settling on his shoulder. "I just want to be free." "You won't shoot me," Elias said, a twisted smile forming as he tried to call her bluff. You're a miner's wife. You wash clothes. You cook stew. You don't kill men." Jenny cocked the hammer. The sound was a loud click in the winter air. "I buried the miner's wife," she said softly. "She died in the cabin you left her in." She pulled the trigger. The Colt bucked in her hand, flashing orange. Elias screamed, a high, thin sound. The bullet took him in the high shoulder, spinning him around. He slammed against the dirt wall of the grave and collapsed onto the crate of money, clutching his bleeding shoulder, wailing in pain. "She shot him!" one of the deputies yelled, stunned. The distraction was all Silas needed. While the deputies stared at the widow who had just shot her husband, Silas Thorne rose from behind the crypt. He didn't seek cover this time. He walked out into the open, a gun in each hand. "Look at me!" Silas roared at Coltrane. Coltrane swung his rifle around, abandoning Jenny to face the greater threat. "Die, you dog!" Coltrane shouted. The two men fired at the same time. Coltrane's bullet hit Silas. Jenny saw Silas's body jerk violently, saw the puff of dust from his coat as the slug slammed into his chest. But Silas didn't fall. Not yet. He stood his ground, legs planted wide, and unleashed hell. He fanned the hammer of his right-hand gun, firing 3 shots in a fraction of a second. Bang, bang, bang. The shots were grouped tight, a master's cluster. Coltrane's chest disintegrated. The sheriff was lifted out of his saddle as if he'd been kicked by a mule. He flew backward, landing in a heap of snow and blood, his rifle spinning away into the darkness. The last deputy, seeing his boss obliterated and the terrifying resilience of the gunman, didn't wait to see what happened next. He wheeled his horse around and galloped into the night, vanishing into the shadows of the valley. Silence returned to the graveyard. Absolute, ringing silence. Silas stood there for a moment, the smoking guns hanging from his hands. Then, slowly, like a great tree finally succumbing to the axe, he crumpled. "Silas!" Jenny dropped her gun and ran. She scrambled over the frozen ground, skidding on her knees as she reached him. He was lying on his back, his eyes open, staring up at the moon that was finally breaking through the storm clouds. She tore open his coat. The wound was bad. Center mass. There was too much blood, dark and rhythmic in its flow. "No, no, no," Jenny wept, pressing her hands against the hole, trying to stem the tide. "You stay with me, Silas Thorne. You hear me? You don't get to die." Silas coughed, a wet, rattling sound. He looked at her, his vision swimming. A faint smile touched his lips, softening the harsh lines of his face. "Stop. Stop pressing," he whispered. "Let it flow, Jenny. It's done." "It's not done," she cried, tears freezing on her face. "We have the money. We have the horses. I can get you to a doctor. Just hold on." "The money," Silas wheezed. He reached up, his hand trembling, and took her wrist. His grip was weak, fading. "Take it. Don't let the world make you small again." "I don't want the money if I have to be alone," she sobbed. "You were never alone," Silas murmured, his eyes drifting shut. "You just needed a push." "Silas, please." "Funny," he breathed, his voice barely a ghost of a sound. "It doesn't feel cold anymore." His chest rose one last time, hitched and settled. The light left his blue eyes, leaving them fixed on the stars. Jenny sat there for a long time, holding the hand of the man who had come into her house as a threat and died as her savior. The wind picked up again, blowing snow over his still form, beginning the work of burial. Finally, a sound broke her grief. "Jenny." It was a moan from the open grave. Jenny stiffened. She gently laid Silas's hand on his chest. She wiped her eyes with the back of her bloody hand. She stood up. She walked to the edge of the pit. Elias was huddled in the corner of the grave, sitting on the crate. He was pale, clutching his shoulder, but the wound wasn't fatal. He looked up at her, and she saw the hope ignite in his eyes. He thought he had won. The sheriff was dead. The gunman was dead. It was just him and his wife. "Baby," Elias croaked, trying to smile. "Help me up. He's dead, isn't he? We're safe now. Throw me a rope. We'll load the money. We'll go to San Francisco." Jenny looked down at him. She looked at the money he was sitting on. $80,000. "You're right, Elias," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You're safe now. No one will ever hurt you again." Elias reached up with his good arm. "Come on, Jenny. Pull me up." Jenny reached down and picked up the shovel Silas had thrown. She weighed it in her hands. "The deed," she said. "The paper in the Bible." "What?" Elias blinked, confused. "The deed," she repeated. "It says this plot belongs to Elias Vance. Plot 44. "Yeah, so nobody would check it," Elias said impatiently. "Now help me up." "I can't steal, Elias," she said. "I'm a God-fearing woman, and this is your plot." She drove the shovel into the pile of excavated earth. "Jenny?" Elias's voice rose in pitch. "What are you doing?" She threw the first shovel of dirt. It hit him in the chest, dusting his face with cold soil. "Jenny, stop!" She threw another, and another. "I'm alive! Jenny, I'm your husband!" Elias screamed, trying to scramble up the sides, but the frozen earth crumbled under his fingers, and his wounded shoulder made it impossible to climb. "My husband died in a cave-in," Jenny said, the rhythm of her shoveling steady and relentless. "Scrape, throw, scrape, throw. You're just the thief who stole his name." I'm sorry, Elias shrieked as the dirt began to cover his legs. "I'll give you the money. Take it all, just let me out." Jenny didn't answer. She didn't want the money. She realized, with a dark satisfaction, that the money was exactly where it belonged. It was the price of admission to hell. She shoveled until the screams turned to muffled pleas. She shoveled until the pleas turned to whimpers. She shoveled until there was nothing but silence. When the ground was flat, the sun was beginning to crest over the mountains, painting the snow in hues of violent violet and blood orange. Jenny Vance stood over the fresh grave. She was exhausted, covered in blood and dirt, her hands blistered. She turned and walked to Silas's body. She couldn't bury him. The ground was too hard to dig another hole, and she wouldn't put him next to Elias. She managed to lift him, dragging him to his horse. It took every ounce of her strength to drape him over the saddle. "I'm taking you to the high ground, Silas," she whispered to the body, "where the eagles live. You won't sleep in the dirt." She mounted her own horse. She didn't look back at the grave or the $80,000 buried 6 feet under. She turned her face toward the west, toward the coast, toward a future she would carve out with the same hands that had just buried her past. Jenny Vance traveled for 3 weeks to reach the Pacific. She never claimed the stolen fortune, leaving it to rot in the earth alongside the man who sold his soul for it. But she didn't arrive in San Francisco empty-handed. In the saddlebags of Silas's horse, she found a small leather pouch containing his own savings, enough to buy a small boarding house on the cliffs overlooking the ocean. She lived there for 40 years. She never remarried. She became a legend in the city, the woman who wore a gun belt under her skirts and stared down ruffians with eyes that had seen the devil and buried him. And in the hallway of her inn, there was no portrait of a husband. There was only a single, pearl-handled Schofield revolver mounted on the wall, polished to a shine, pointing toward the door, a warning to the wicked, and a welcome to those who had nowhere else to go. That was the story of the widow and the gunman, a tale of betrayal, cold justice, and the price of greed. I want to know what you think. Did Jenny do the right thing by leaving the money in the grave, or should she have taken it? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. If you enjoyed this Wild West saga, please smash that like button. It helps me bring more stories like this to life. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there on the trail.